Hi guys, it's your friendly neighborhood madwoman, and yes, I found this via Mecha42's channel, and I'm going to address this even though it's weeks old. Came out August 2nd, 2019 by Dom Nero. Because as a writer, and as a comic book person, or used to be comic book person in high school, and I'm getting slowly back into them now, this hurts me. This hurts me as a writer, as a creator, as someone that loves a well-rounded and well-written character. For those of you that follow my blog, for those of you that have seen a lot of, my content on story writing, world building, character development, that's the angle I'm going to attack this at as I respond to this article. Marvel's Black Widow movie will reject the discriminatory comics. Trolls be damned. Number one, I am getting sick and tired of this phrase. Any iteration of this phrase, any variation of this phrase, any take of this phrase from the people that think that any criticism being levied against comic book movies, Star Wars, or Star Trek, or trolls, we're not. We're people that grew up with this content. We're people that grew up with the original series. We're people that grew up reading the comic books, watching the cartoons, discussing at length if DC was better than Marvel or the other way around. What our favorite comic book characters were, why we liked these characters. And for us to go to a big screen and, see some of our characters become a fraction of a shadow of what they used to be, it saddens us. It frustrates us, and it disappoints us on a lot of levels. It says, writer Jack Schaefer says she's not interested in adhering to comic canon. If you're not going to respect the canon, the history, the background from where these characters came from, why are you even on the project? There's a reason these characters have the backstory that they have. There's a reason they've gone through the struggles that they've gone through. And to just act like it doesn't exist, it's not respectful of the character and how the character has developed over the years. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has faced many criticisms over the past 11 years, mainly because we realized from the first MCU movie that even though there were some parts that adhered to the canon in the comic books, there was a lot of variation from the comic books. Complaining seems to be a routine part of life for the faction of the comic book superfans who are very vocal on the internet. If you're talking about comic book geeks, yes, and it's not complaining. There's a difference between complaining and criticism. Complaining for complaining's sake is annoying, I will agree. But critiquing and trying to point out the fact that you are not respecting the canon, the source material, the actual origins of these characters and where they came from, that's valid criticism. Okay? It is. It's valid criticism. And for you to shoot it down because it doesn't fit with what you want the characters to be, I only have one response for that. Then you write a character that is completely unique the way you want that character to be. Don't take already established characters, disrespect their source material and their origins, and expect the fans of those characters not to criticize or be vocal. Places like Twitter and Reddit are set on fire anytime the MCU announces something that seems to dishonor the comics. Yeah. When you tokenize characters for the lack of, for forcing diversity. When you shoehorn things in that don't need to be there. When you completely take an arc like Infinity War and you write it the way you want it to be, when the better story was actually the canon from the comic books, we're going to critique it. Because to me, and to many people, you didn't respect or do the source material justice. Now, did we want you to do a frame by frame, panel by panel representation of the Infinity War? We're realistic in that we understand that was probably improbable to begin with. We just wanted you to respect it enough for us to realize that you wrote Thanos' motivation correctly. You didn't. That the, Marvel's heroes that survived were the ones that survived in the comic books. That wasn't so. These were some of the critiques. Some of the things that you're calling us trolls for. For a certain type of Marvel fan, foregoing the sacred text is considered a mortal sin. Yes, when you completely take the comic book and throw it in the garbage, it's no longer canon. It's no longer respecting canon or has anything to do with the canon if you're taking a character that we know and you're doing your own thing with it. Okay? First, let me see. But according to an interview on Inverse, the writer of the upcoming Black Widow film doesn't give a shit about that. Oh, how's the sinking feeling? And for good reason. Have you ever seen some of the portrayals of the women in these decades-old books? Phew, not great. You mean Mary Jane, who on several occasions put Peter Parker in his place for making decisions for her? Black Widow, who would often swoop in and save the day because she was an independent, strong woman with a skill set that she was trained to have to get herself and her team out of certain situations. Spider-Woman, who stood up on her own. Storm, who was a competent leader. Jean, who was a competent leader. You mean those that weren't treated right? Whew, boy, are you off the mark. Jack Schaefer said she can't not be involved, apparently she can't English either, in the new wave of female-centered stories that Marvel has in store for its Phase 4. The writer, whose weird sci-fi rom-com timer, never heard of it, happened to hit theaters in the same weekend as Iron Man 2, which is probably why I've never heard of it, is rejecting the problematic, sometimes outright oppressive texts from Marvel history that fanboys take so much stock in today. What oppressive texts? How they were, well, you're saying texts, so obviously you're not referring to how they're drawn in the comic books. Jean and Storm were respected for their input on the X-Men team. Domino, the same thing with X-Factor or X-Force. I can't remember. I always get those two confused. Okay? Pepper Potts was always respected by Tony for what she had to say and her input and her ideas. Black Widow, again, respected amongst S.H.I.E.L.D. for the things that she did, for the contributions that she gave to the team, for the ideas that she had when they were coming up with a plan. So I don't understand what you're talking about here. Unless you're talking about Black Widow's backstory, which is relevant to who she is now. Unless you're going to throw that out the window. Unless you're talking about how Storm was treated within her tribe to make her leave because they didn't understand what was going on. Unless you are referring to how Rogue was treated when her family found out that she was a mutant and they didn't know how to handle it because she grew up in the Bible Belt and they did not see it as a gift. Are you talking about those backstories? Because all those shaped the characters. All those made the characters who they were today. She told Inverse, when people react with hate, it saddens me. It's not hate, it's criticism. There's a difference. I think it's a shame, but that's not where I want to put my energy. I'm not interested in the loud, sour grapes voices. In other words, you're ignoring the fandom. Because, that worked in 2016. Ghostbusters. That worked for Captain Marvel. That so worked for Captain Marvel. That's working for Star Wars, isn't it? Worked for Discovery. Didn't work for any of that. But, don't pay attention to any of that. Comic books are historically guilty of problematic depictions of women. No, they're not. And some of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies have been guilty of the same treatment. No. Black Widow's first appearance in Iron Man 2, after all, has Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark literally saying, I want one. And Pepper Potts giving him the stink eye and shaking her head no. Or are you conveniently forgetting that because it doesn't fit what you want to see? Because, you're already of the mindset that, any of the female characters in the Marvel Universe were treated like shit, which they really weren't. Natasha Romanoff, like many female characters in comics, is in dire need of an update. No, she's not. But it looks like Jack Schaefer is set to challenge all of that. Great. She told Inverse, I wasn't a huge superhero movie fan before starting to work at Marvel. Then why are you working at Marvel? Why are you working at Marvel? If you don't like superheroes and you're not a huge fan of the genre, why? Why work it? This is the same problem I had when J.J. Abrams said he hadn't read anything or seen any of the movies or television shows having to do with Star Trek before he did his Star Trek movies. Why? Why? If you don't want anything to do with the source material, if you don't like the source material, if you're not going to respect the source material, why be on the project? Because you know what that tells me? You know what this tells me right here? You're going to do a shit job before the movie's even out. But now that I'm doing it, there's so much opportunity to make big positive statements. Like what? Like what? Because if you're going to shift this in the same direction that Captain Marvel was shifted, then you're going to make all the men look like incompetent fucking idiots, which they weren't, and you're going to make all the women Mary Sues, which they're not. And then you're going to wonder why the critique is coming out again. You're going to wonder why the fandom is not happy, and you're going to wonder why your numbers are tanking in the box office unless Disney does this wonderful thing of buying empty seats to artificially inflate their revenue. Hopefully, the Black Widow movie, which is set to come out May 1st, 2020, will set a precedent for how women are treated in these narratives. They weren't treated bad to begin with. We're already voting with our wallets. We need to continue to do that. As a writer and a blogger and someone who produces content, it hurts my heart to see what they're doing with female characters nowadays, thinking that they need to be revamped, renewed, redone, updated. They don't. Black Widow does not need to be changed in any way. Her backstory, her origin, is what made her her. You change that, and she's a completely different character. She's not Black Widow anymore. You don't understand this because you don't care. You're looking at it through your own discriminatory lens. You're looking at it the way you want to look at it and not the way it should be looked at. Marvel doesn't have women that have been discriminated against unless it's been as a team, X-Men, X-Force, X-Factor, because those books were written at a time and they were taken at a time to parallel what was going on in politics and in the news at that time. Acceptance of people that were different, whether they were male or female. Except in the comic books, it's because they were mutants. Black Widow is an assassin. How did she get that way? She got that way through rigorous training, being abused, and things of that nature. You don't need to erase that. Erasing that does a grave disservice and disrespect to the character and where she came from and how far she's come. You keep calling us trolls. You keep calling us alt-right. You keep calling us Nazis because we don't fit in your little box and we don't blindly follow where you lead. We're not going to. Because we see you destroying what we grew up with. Are we angry? Yes. Are we frustrated? Yes. Are we disappointed? Oh, most definitely we're disappointed. Because I'll tell you what. Okay? As a female, I grew up absolutely loving Star Wars. I loved Star Trek. I loved the stories. I loved the characters. I didn't know the significance at the time, but as I got older, I knew. I read X-Men. I read X-Force and X-Factor. I read it wasn't called Night Crawlers. Night Stalkers. You know, I watched, I read Blade. I've watched the cartoons. I've seen the movies. I've critiqued the movies. I've talked to my friends ad nauseum about the movies. Okay, yes, the movies are different. All we ask is that you respect the source material, not throw it in the garbage, not burn it, not act like it doesn't exist. Because when you do that in order to fit it into your little narrative box, that's when we close our wallets and don't even bother going to the movie theaters. That's when we get on our YouTube channels, on our Twitters, on our blogs, and we start critiquing and we start criticizing, and yes, we start complaining because you're ruining the things that we grew up with because you think it stinks. You think it's all the isms in the world because it doesn't fit into your neat little perfect box. Instead of ruining the things that we grew up with, why don't you write your own shit? Why don't you do your own thing? Why? Because you want to see how many people you upset? No. Because you think through your little twisted vision that for some strange reason these stories that have been written are all the isms and istics in the book, and you think you have to fix it. Some things don't need to be fixed. Some things don't need to be rebooted. Some things don't need to be reworked. Some things just need to be left alone. Hi, this is your friendly neighborhood mad woman thanking you for watching another House of Geek video. If you liked what you saw, that's what that thumbs up button is for. If you didn't like it, well, there's that button too. Just let me know why you didn't like it. Maybe we can get a conversation going in the comment section. There's a subscribe button and that bell that's supposed to notify you, but it's about as finicky as a pregnant woman in a grocery store or a woman on PMS taking a picture. All my social medias and other links for other channels are in the description below, including one for my little pup right here, little Ruby Sue. Hope to see you in the next one.